Hello and welcome to Stars, Cells, and God. My name is Hugh Ross. I'm the founder of Reasons to Believe and an astrophysicist. And today I'm joined by Fuz Rana, the president of Reasons to Believe and a biochemist. And welcome, Fuz. We're happy to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh.
And you're going to talk to us about Nova-1 gene and mice, and how that helps us understand how humans and Neanderthals are different, and why we shouldn't expect mice and rats to be talking anytime soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Take it away.
Yeah. Well, to kind of ease us into this discussion, I don't know if you spent a lot of time when you were a kid on Saturday mornings watching cartoons on TV, but I sure did.
No, well, keep in mind, Fuz, we didn't have a TV, so
okay,
so the option wasn't available.
Yeah, well, we weren't loaded with money when I was growing up, but we did have a black and white TV. But part of my Saturday morning routines was to get myself a bowl of cereal and then turn on the TV and watch cartoons. And among my favorite cartoons were the Looney Tunes from Warner Brothers, and one of the characters was Sylvester the cat. And one of his nemesis was Speedy Gonzales, a mouse.
A mouse, okay.
Yeah, and so they would tangle it up and mix it up. And Sylvester the cat would insult Speedy Gonzales by saying, "Are you a man or a mouse?" Right, and that insult actually has pertinence to the discovery that I want to talk about, as you pointed out. It involves work by researchers from Rockefeller University in New York that actually use CRISPR gene editing to introduce the human version of what's called the Nova-1 gene into the mouse genome, and then they looked at the vocal behavior. And
now, tell us about this gene. What does it do for humans?
Yeah. Well, on the basis of that work, they actually conclude that this could very well explain why human beings actually have language capacity and that human beings would actually be distinguished from Neanderthals in that effect. And so here's actually the paper that I'm talking about. It was published in Nature Communications just a few weeks ago. And this protein, Nova-1, is actually a significant protein for a number of reasons. One is that people have implicated it in contributing to human speech capabilities. If there's mutations in the Nova-1 gene, it can lead to speech pathologies and language disorders. People study mice as a proxy for human beings,
right.
And this particular protein is expressed at very high levels in the midbrain of mice and has also been implicated in the motor abilities that mice employ in order to vocalize. And so the thought was, well, this could very well be a critical protein that helps explain why human beings have speech capability. There's something else very interesting about this protein as well, and that is that this protein is one of about 100 proteins in the human genome that's different from the proteins in the Neanderthal and the Denisovan genome, right? And so, most of the genes in the human and Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes are identical. But there is a small number that are different. And some of those that are different play a role in neural development, cognition. They also play, they also are indirectly implicated in neural capabilities, cognition, because mutations in those genes cause neuropsychiatric disorders. And so Nova-1 is in that grouping. And it turns out that Nova-1 is, again, unique in humans compared to all other mammals. And so this is a diagram that I took from the paper in which it's a little bit busy here, but what it's essentially showing is the Nova-1 protein, and that for all mammals at position 197, there's an isoleucine amino acid. In humans, at that position, it's a valine, and that isoleucine in 197 is found in Denisovans and Neanderthals. So what they speculated was that this could very well, again, be a critical protein that distinguishes humans in a significant way from Neanderthals with regard to language and speech capabilities. So what they ended up doing was a really nice genetic engineering study where in mice zygotes, they use CRISPR gene editing. So a zygote would be the single
Right.
cell.
Yeah.
And you have to do the gene editing at that point to get the best results in gene editing work. But they introduced the human version of NOVA1 into the mouse genome. These are called knock-in experiments, and they disabled the mouse version of the NOVA1.
Replaced it with the human version.
Right. And then they noted that the mice developed normally, that they were healthy as adults, that the gene expression patterns in the brain were identical. So the thought was that the CRISPR gene editing didn't alter the
damage,
mice right in any way other than introducing the human version of the
So
NOVA1
how did
gene.
it squeak?
Well, what ended up happening is they were able to show that while the gene expression was the same, what's called the splicing of the RNA for genes that NOVA1 influences was altered. So NOVA1 is a protein that binds to RNA. And once it binds to RNA, it controls how it is spliced. So in mammals, the genes are interrupted by sequences called introns. So you have exons that code for the amino acid sequence in proteins and introns that are interruptive sequences. And what happens is that those introns are spliced out of the RNA transcript and to form a mature RNA that then is read by the proteins. But you can splice those genes in alternate ways, or you can splice the RNA in alternate ways to produce different proteins from the same transcript. And so while the gene expression wasn't altered, the splicing was altered when the human version of NOVA1 was introduced. And they noted that the vocalization in the mice changed. So they did two experiments, one where they took a pup and separated it from its mother. The pup issues a distress cry. And in the gene-edited mice, the vocalization was much more complex than in the wild type, and the pitch was different. They saw the same thing for adult males that were issuing mating calls, that the vocalization pattern was more complex and the pitch changed. Neither seemed to have an effect on whether the mother responded to the pup or whether female responded to the males, but it altered vocalization. So this is an indication that NOVA1 is indeed controlling speech, or at least controlling vocalization in mice, but in humans it implicates it as controlling speech.
Right.
Now, there's another experiment that was done
Let me stop you there. When you say complex, how complex?
In other words, the sonic patterns that you see were multi-humped or multiphasic, right? Versus more monotonic, as an example.
Hearing a mouse squeak when it's running away from, say, me with a broom.
Yeah, I don't think...
Would the modulation go up and down?
Yes. I mean, basically. Okay. I mean, the researchers weren't able to hear the mice and note anything discernible, right? But by monitoring the sonic behavior,
they could see it.
Yeah, the sonograms.
Okay.
Right. So that's how they were able to determine the complexity of it.
But there was real modulation that they were.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, this follows on the heels of another study done a few years ago involving NOVA1. And in fact, I think in the inaugural episode of Star Cells and God, if I'm not mistaken, I actually talked about this discovery. And this involved NOVA1 as well. And this is taken from the research paper that was published in 2021 or something like that, where the researchers Neanderthalized brain organoids. I think you may remember this study.
Yes, yeah, I was with you on that one. I remember.
Yes, you were. And so the idea behind this experiment is that you can take what are called induced pluripotent stem cells, and depending on how you culture them in the lab, you can coax them to form three-dimensional cell cultures. They're still, about a millimeter in diameter, not very big, but that these cell cultures will develop some resemblance to fetal brain tissue, where you start seeing neuron formation, the formation of glial cells. There's an ultrastructure to it. And the longer that cell culture persists, the greater the cellular complexity. And so what they did is they compared the brain organoids that were produced from induced pluripotent stem cells with those that had been gene edited to introduce the Neanderthal version, or in this case, the mouse version of NOVA1. Mm-hmm. And they saw that the morphology of the brain organoid was different, and the gene expression patterns were different. And so here are two studies that are giving us essentially the same conclusion, that this single amino acid difference actually has physiological consequences. It has physiological consequences in ways that suggest it is impacting the neural development and the neurobiology, of humans and Neanderthals. It's going to have a consequence, and that it seems to be connected to vocalization, as well as maybe other things in terms of brain development. So this is really a very powerful scientific, evidence that humans and Neanderthals are indeed different.
Well, we're talking about a neurological difference rather than a vocal anatomy difference, right?
Right. Yeah. But because this gene seems to be controlling, or because NOVA1 as a expressed gene as a protein is controlling splicing, and those genes that are involved in splicing seem to play a role in the motor processes involved in vocalization, that while it may not necessarily alter vocal cords or the vocal, the larynx, for example, it still could actually have implications in terms of speech capacities.
Yeah, it controls them, but it doesn't have any effect on the anatomy.
Yes, yeah. So there's no evidence that it has anatomical effects in the mice or in humans or in Neanderthals, but it is impacting the way in which the brain operates or controls the vocalization.
Right.
Right. So this is evidence that humans and Neanderthals really are different. That you could make the argument that Neanderthals are cognitively inferior, that they may had some capacity to communicate vocally, but what they are doing is not what modern humans are doing when we express speech and we express language. And so this is significant for a number of reasons. One is it really is making an argument for human exceptionalism. They didn't quite go that far in the paper, but they were butting up against that idea of human exceptionalism.
Did they cite the paper from 2021?
Mm-hmm.
They did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, if people go back to the very first episode of Star Cells and God, they can get that actual paper as well, if they're interested. But there's a growing number of anthropologists who hold to an evolutionary perspective on humanity who are beginning to argue that humans really are different in kind, not different in degree, from other animals that are extant and even from Neanderthals. So they're arguing for human exceptionalism. And one of the features that they argue makes us exceptional, there's other features, but one of them is our capacity for symbolism, that we can represent the world symbolically and that we can combine and recombine those symbols in a variety of different ways. And this is the basis for language, for music, for art. And so what this is essentially showing is that, look, we're actually seeing genetic differences between humans and Neanderthals that clearly have physiological impacts that are related to likely to speech and to language, that really suggests that humans had a much more sophisticated language capacity than Neanderthals, that humans were probably more cognitively inferior than Neanderthals. So this is reinforcing the notion of human exceptionalism, and it's exactly what you'd expect if indeed what separates us is our capacity for symbolism and the ability to manipulate those symbols.
This shows up even in our language because we're the one species where we communicate with one another. We're communicating abstract concepts.
Yes.
Right.
Right. So it's not just simply representing the world with symbols, but then by combining and recombining those symbols, we can create narratives that represent abstract ideas that we can then in turn represent symbolically.
I like the phrase, we invent them and we use them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really gratifying when you see disparate scientific results from different areas actually begin to converge to tell a consistent story. Now, at Reasons to Believe, we take the view that human beings were made in God's image. And that means that human beings stand apart from all other creatures. And what's interesting is that we're seeing now growing scientific evidence that really supports that idea that human beings stand apart from all other creatures in a way that would be consistent with human beings bearing God's image. And, our model at Reasons to Believe says that human beings were created, that they didn't evolve, but they were created, which means that we have to do something with the hominins. And our approach is that the hominins were creatures that were made by God that had some measure of intelligence, some emotional capacity, but they lacked the image of God, right? And therefore we would expect them to be behaviorally distinct from modern humans, where you would argue that the behavior is quote unquote inferior to modern humans, who we see as descendants of Adam and Eve. So this discovery supports our model. And it's interesting because I think we probably are unique as an organization in terms of our view of Neanderthals.
Yeah, we are.
Because, for example, young Earth creationists argue Neanderthals bore God's image, that they were descendants of Adam and Eve. Bill Craig, in his book, The Quest for the Historical Adam, argues that Neanderthals were like us. They bore God's image, right? And so that perspective isn't supported by this study, and I would argue other studies as well. Whereas our particular model, which seems to be an outlier, is actually, I think, more well supported by the scientific evidence than other alternative models that I've seen.
Well, it's the one model that allows you to seamlessly integrate what you see in nature and what you see in the Bible.
Yeah.
So you don't have to twist what the Bible is saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, Hugh, that was it.
Well, the discovery I want to talk about kind of fits in with your discovery of human exceptionalism. And it's a paper that was published on Valentine's Day, so just a few days ago, in Science Advances. And they were basically trying to refute Brandon Carter's famous paper that he published in 1983. And it was a paper where he was basically arguing for fine-tuning that makes possible the existence of human beings. I don't know if Brandon Carter is a Christian or not, but he seems to write like a theist. But he was basically saying we humans must be exceptionally rare or unique in the universe because of how difficult it is from an evolutionary perspective to go from the origin of life all the way to human beings. And he proposed what he called the hard steps model, that the problem with trying to find another planet or moon that's got the equivalent of intelligent life on it, like us human beings, is that you have to go through all these hard evolutionary steps. And he proposed 5 steps. People since 1983 have added several more hard steps. But these researchers, 4 of them, astrobiologists and geochemists in this paper, were basically talking about the 5 steps. Step 1, the origin of life. It's not easy to bring about the origin of life.
Right.
Step 2, photosynthetic life shows up really early. Some would argue that as soon as you get the origin of life, you got photosynthetic life. Step 3, where you get the first appearance of eukaryotes, where you got life forms where the cells have a nucleus. And then the fourth step they talked about is when you have multicellular life with cellular complexity, basically megafauna and a megaflora. And then the last step would be going from large animals to getting human beings. And since that time, there's been other hard steps thrown
You know,
in.
if I had to choose the 5 hard steps, that probably would be exactly
Probably be
that.
the 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, these are the 5 they address, but then they make the point, what we see about each of those 5, they happen at the very moment that physical and chemical conditions on Earth would permit them to happen. In other words, as soon as you got, liquid water and solid rocks remaining in stable form on the Earth, you got the origin of life. As soon as conditions permit photosynthetic life, you get photosynthetic life. As soon as you have eukaryotes, they show up. Likewise, they make a big deal in the paper about it takes very special conditions to have, animals that have relatively large body sizes with complex organs. But they said the moment that the physics and chemistry permits it to happen, it's there. Basically, the moment you got enough oxygen to make those kinds of organisms possible, it shows up. Likewise, the moment that humans can possibly exist on the Earth, we show up at that moment. And so therefore they argue, since it happens immediately, these steps can't be hard, they must be easy. If they were hard, we wouldn't anticipate it. They would show up the moment the conditions would permit them to exist. And then they make a second argument in the paper against the hard steps model of Brand and Carter. They say, look how frequently, when you look on the fossil record and you look at life on planet Earth today, we see repeated evolutionary outcomes. I mean, you've written extensively about convergence, where we see the identical designs showing up in species that are unrelated from an evolutionary perspective. I remember very early in the history of the ministry, I think back in 1999, you wrote a paper about, look at the fish, the sand lance and the chameleon.
Yeah.
One is a fish that's feeding, on ocean, basically shallow seashore bottoms.
Yeah.
The other one's in the desert.
Yeah.
But they got the identical tongue and eye designs and the identical technique for capturing prey. And there's literally hundreds of examples like that. The fact that they say that there are hundreds means that these evolutionary steps, again, must be easy. So that's kind of their whole argument. Since these steps are easy, we would anticipate that the origin of life has got to be an easy step, and all the intermediary steps up to the equivalent of human beings have to be easy. Therefore, Brandon Carter is wrong. ETI is not unique to Earth or extremely rare in the universe. It must be very abundant. And therefore, we should anticipate finding, intelligent life all over the universe. Now, they end their paper, which is what I appreciate, with a test. They say, here's how you can test our hypothesis. If this is really correct, we should be able to find multiple places where we see evidence for these steps, which means we're going to see places where we got planets and stars that are suitable for intelligent life. We're going to find places where we see photosynthetic life must have happened, because we're going to see oxygen in the atmosphere, along with other life biosignatures that tell us these steps have happened. So if our assumption is correct, these are easy steps, we're going to see it repeated as we do our astrobiological studies. Just look in the universe, we should find multiple examples of where at least some of these easy steps have occurred. So, but I find that interesting because that test actually is being performed right before our eyes. And it's been performed for the past 30 years. And we haven't come up with any examples. We've yet to find a planet that would be suitable for the origin of life. And we can't find, or we'd like to find a planet where photosynthetic life has brought the oxygen level up to where you get more advanced life. So it's like, if their model is really correct, by now we already should have at least a few examples where we see evidence that these steps could at least have occurred. Not saying that they have occurred, but at least open up the potential they have occurred. And the fact is, we've yet to find any examples where there's even the possibility that any of these steps have occurred.
Yeah.
Now, they're saying, we've only found 7,500 planets outside of our solar system. Can't we, do a more exhaustive study? But 7,500 is not a trivial database.
Yeah.
I would also argue that it's not just the fact that you have to have a kind of planet for life. You need a special star.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're looking at a much larger database. We're looking at millions of stars that we have measured to see if they have the characteristics sufficiently like the sun that that star could have a planet orbiting it in which advanced life could possibly arise.
Yeah.
And this is where we get the rare sun hypothesis. It's not just we've not been able to find a planet like Earth. I mean, I think what's significant, so far, the most Earth-like planet we've found besides planet Earth is Venus. And yet no one would look at Venus as a candidate for life. But that's the best one we found. And what's also interesting, Venus is the best by a wide margin.
Mm.
None of these other exoplanets comes even close to matching Venus in being, quote, Earth-like. And we've yet to find even a single star that's like the sun. And here we're looking at a huge database.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think these researchers can't argue, well, we haven't just done enough study yet. At least in the case of stars, we have.
Yeah.
And you can extend that to galaxies. Say we've yet to find a galaxy that's sufficiently like ours to be a candidate for life.
Mm.
But I'd also like to propose another test. This isn't in the paper, it's just one I thought up. Okay, our model says that the reason why we see these hard steps in the record of life on planet Earth is that God has intervened to supernaturally fine-tune the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, the planetary system, or galaxy to make possible these steps, and he intervenes to make it happen right away. Well, I think one test you can put on that, is there any evidence that the mind behind these steps in our model could be stretched out over a longer period of time? In other words, what I'm suggesting is one of the evidences that it really is a supernatural, superintelligent mind is we see that these steps must happen the moment the physical and chemical conditions would permit them. Otherwise, you don't make the window of time in which human beings can possibly exist. And that test has been done. And the truth is, indeed, if you want humans or the equivalent, these 5 steps must happen at the very earliest moment that physical and chemical conditions would permit them.
Yeah.
And so it's basically saying this mind, given the laws of physics we see in the universe, really can't dawdle and say, well, I can take my time in making all this happen. We really see the necessity for immediate supernatural interventions at the moment they can take place. And I think this is particularly a powerful test in light of the fact there are more than just these 5 hard steps.
Yeah.
There are, I think I could name a couple of dozen hard steps in addition. I do agree with you. These are the big 5, but you look at things like the Avalon explosion, the Cambrian explosion, the 5 mass speciation events that followed the mass extinction events, even things like the first appearance of ants.
Yeah.
All these are crucial in order to make possible the existence of us human beings.
Yeah.
That combined with what we now understand, there's a very narrow time window in which we humans can exist and exercise our intelligence to develop sophisticated civilization and technology. And given that that time window measures maybe only 100,000 years wide, it's like you really can't have this supernatural mind saying, you know what, I can take a coffee break, I can wait a bit before I do this next step. No, it's all going to be done rapidly, immediately, once conditions permit, because you have to make that narrow time window.
Yeah.
Now, I would argue the window's broader if we're talking a small population of humans that doesn't develop civilization. You get a broader window. But if you want humans with a large population, with a civilization technology, from a biblical perspective, of being able to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world, and where we have billions that are saved from their sin and evil, that is the biblical model, then you really do have to have a creator who's very aggressive and immediate in the way he prepares these steps, if that indeed is a goal.
Yeah.
So it's basically taking their argument, because all they argue is, what do we need to get humans?
Yeah.
Say, well, hey, we're not just talking humans, we're talking technology. In fact, their paper is saying technology, because they're saying, if we're right, the SETI program is going to quickly be successful. We're going to be able to see these intelligent signals. But those intelligent signals presume that species of intelligent life has developed civilization and technology.
Yeah.
And there again, that fits the Christian worldview.
Well, I've not read the paper, but just based on your description, to me, it seems like an unwarranted conclusion to say that just because something happened rapidly, that it's got to be easy. It's got to be easy, particularly when we have people that are experts in, chemical evolution. We have people that are experts in trying to understand how the eukaryotic cells emerge, for example. We have people that are experts trying to understand the origin of multicellularity, who are completely at a loss for how those kind of transitions take place. That, the work that's been done in those areas, if anything, is showing that this seems to be almost an insurmountable problem to have that transition from one regime of complexity to another.
Oh, Fuz, you're anticipating test number 3.
Okay.
Test number 3 is they're presuming that natural mechanisms can make these things happen rapidly.
Yeah.
And as you're demonstrating, that can be tested through field experiments. It can be tested in the lab.
Yeah.
And I think you're making an excellent case. All the research we've done is basically telling us, if you're looking at natural processes to pull this off, it's not going to happen immediately.
Yeah. Well, you have researchers, for example, that are, I'm finishing up the manuscript for a book, working title, Should We Play God? And it's about creating artificial non-natural life forms, in a laboratory setting, either by, creating synthetic cells or genetically modifying, organisms, whether bacteria or plants and animals and fungi. And the amount of effort it takes when you understand the biology of the organisms to even, modify a genome to introduce a new metabolic capability, or even to introduce a single gene, is not an easy thing to do, right? And so it's not just simply people working in evolutionary theory trying to figure out how these transitions took place and are, again, at their wits' end. It's that we actually have people going in the lab trying to replicate these processes as part of genetic work in genetic engineering and synthetic biology. And it's not an easy thing to do, to create a plant, a GMO plant that produces, some extra nutrient. It's not a trivial thing, just simply to put the gene into the plant and get it to be expressed in the proper way. So you have some of the best minds in the world working on this problem, and they struggle, operating under highly controlled conditions where they have the techniques to manipulate the organism, and they have a pretty sound knowledge of the organism's biology, and still it's hard. So, for these people to draw the conclusion that rapidity equals ease just says to me they haven't done any kind of broader survey of the literature in those areas.
Keep in mind, they're astrobiologists and geoscientists. They're not biochemists. They're not geneticists. And so, they haven't really dived into that. But what you're suggesting is actually a fourth test. Notice you have to introduce a mind even to do these experiments to see if natural processes can pull this off. Yep. Take the mind element out, you're in way worse trouble.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that work, as you're pointing out, is really an argument for design, right?
Yes.
That
It requires a mind even to make the baby steps.
Yeah,
So,
and I like to refer to it as the empirical argument for design, because you can go in the lab and empirically show what does it take to make that kind of a transition, and it just simply isn't easy, even when you have the best minds in the world producing very sophisticated and ingenious strategies to pull this off, and then requiring...
Well, I think it tells us something about the mind that really did it, because if you look at these 5 steps, in fact, I think you could argue, look at the 24 steps that have been identified in the scientific literature. We humans have not been able to pull off a single one of those steps in our experiments and field observations.
Yeah.
So it's like somebody a whole lot more brilliant than us, with a lot better equipment and technology, must have done it in the first place.
Yeah.
So, well, Fuz, this is great. You got any other comments on this?
No, that was a good discovery.
Well, I'm hoping that this paper has only been out for a few days, but I'm hoping it'll generate some lively discussion where people actually make the point, hey, does speed mean easy?
Yeah.
So,
well, I've seen some popular science news outlets refer to this paper, so it's really good that you talked about it.
Well, since you've written so much on, convergence, it's like, okay, let's go back and take a Christian worldview perspective on this. We see these hundreds, maybe thousands of examples of convergence in life history and life on planet Earth today. Can we discern reasons why the Creator God of the Bible would want all those repeated outcomes?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you talk about convergence, because if you look at the nature of how most people understand the evolutionary process and the mechanisms that undergird evolution, you would expect identical outcomes to be extremely rare.
Right.
Maybe not impossible, but extremely rare. The fact that we see so many of them, it suggests that either we have a fundamental misunderstanding of the evolutionary process, or there is a creator that is playing a role in repeatedly generating identical outcomes. And in fact, when you look at how human designers work, we oftentimes will repeat the same design over and over again, even in different contexts.
Sure.
It's the most efficient way to design and to create.
Well, automobile manufacturing companies have figured that out.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. But it's interesting because there are some evolutionary biologists like Simon Conway Morris who argue that convergence is telling us that the way we understand the evolutionary process is completely wrong. That his argument is that it's not actually natural selection that's shaping outcomes, but it's physical constraints, and that there are only certain endpoints possible, and these happen to be the just right endpoints that produce organisms or biological systems with the just right properties. And so he sees it as almost a type of anthropic principle in biology with respect to the evolutionary process. Now, he may or may not be correct, but the point is that once you start talking about convergence, it's either God is directly intervening to bring about the same outcome over and over again, or God has intervened at the very onset of the universe's inception to rig things in such a way that only certain endpoints are possible. Either way, you can't escape the teleological.
Escape. I think we interviewed Simon Conway Morris a couple of decades ago, and he made that point.
Yeah.
But I think the rigging thing, there's some tests that show that's probably not the answer.
Yeah.
So, and I also see some reasons why God would want to repeat. Psalm 104, God has packed the planet with life, and he's made it as diverse as possible. If that's his goal, there will be repeated designs showing up everywhere. That's what we see. And you also wrote some articles on the long-term evolution experiments. Mm-hmm. If this is something that's built into the laws of physics or the way God structured the universe in the beginning, those long-term evolution experiments should show repeated outcomes, but they don't.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, Fuz, this has been great.
Yep.
Really appreciate you feeding back on this stuff, and I like the way these two discoveries integrated. Thank you for joining us today in Stars, Cells, and God. Join the discussion in the comments below. Remember to like this video and to subscribe for more content. We have a Reasons to Believe YouTube channel. Definitely subscribe. New episodes of Stars, Cells, and God release each Wednesday and are available here on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to share this video with a friend, and remember, the more we learn about science, the more reasons we have to believe in Jesus Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior.